Not all prejudice looks like prejudice. Sometimes it looks like, well, they're great, but they're not a good fit. Or something just feels off. Now, these comments aren't shouted from rooftops, they're not hostile, they're subtle. They can be polite. They're usually pretty vague, but they shape real outcomes. Things like who gets hired, who gets heard, and who gets left behind. Now, the truth is that some of the most persistent biases in our organizations don't come from bad intent. They come from gut feelings, from comfort, from years of unspoken assumptions. So, today we're unpacking the kind of prejudice that hides in plain sight and what we can do to name it, interrupt it, and build fair teams. What's up, UX fam? Welcome to another edition of the Cognition Catalog. It has been a minute. Life lifed me, and it's been hard to get these things out every week like I had planned. So I am sorry about that. Summer is a mess around here with my kids, so I am doing my best. Cut me some goddamn slack. If this is your first time listening in on the Cognition Catalog, every week or so, we'll dig into a new cognitive bias and explore how that bias can impact how our team works together and what we can do to ensure that we don't get caught up in the pitfalls. Because working with people is hard, and the more insights we have into the human condition make it just a little bit easier. To learn more about prejudice, you can find more resources at cognitioncatalog.com and click the little bell down there so you get notified when a new episode drops so you never have to worry about falling for any of these cognitive biases again. And if you want to pick up some big, beautiful art prints of some select biases, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/shop to get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the promo code YouTube to get 10% off your entire order. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Saraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, and Zoe for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those videos right now for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. So a few years ago, I was part of a hiring panel for a product role on my team. Now, one of the candidates had a strong portfolio. They had a kick-ass presentation. They had thoughtful answers, and they had experience that lined up well with what we were looking for in a designer. But after the interview, somebody on the panel said, I don't know, something just didn't quite click. I'm not sure they'd be a good culture fit. And when we asked what they meant, there wasn't a clear answer, just a vague sense of they're not quite like us. Now, to be clear, this wasn't about race or gender, sexuality, or anything like that. They were just different. They had a background in a different industry. They had a different communication style. They went to a different type of college. And in this case, this happened to be a community college. But none of that actually mattered for the job or for the role that we were trying to fill. Now, we ended up picking this person anyway, and they turned out to be a total rock star. But we almost passed on a highly qualified, very thoughtful person because culture fit became a stand-in for familiar. Not all prejudice fits what we picture as prejudice. Now, it doesn't always look like extremists or neo-Nazis waving flags and carrying torches trying to scare a minority group. Sometimes it sounds like they just don't seem like a fit, or I can't put my finger on it, something just feels off, or they're great, but I don't see them in a leadership role. These aren't hate-filled comments. They're not shouted across a room or typed in all caps with hateful imagery attached to them. They're often quiet. They can sound polite, and sometimes they can sound vague. And that's what makes them so hard to catch and harder to challenge. Now, most of the prejudice that shapes our teams and companies today, it doesn't come from bad people. It comes from default thinking. It comes from gut instincts, from comfort. It comes from years of absorbing who looks like a leader, who sounds like a developer, or who feels trustworthy. Prejudice isn't just a personal blind spot, it's often a systems issue. And it shapes who gets hired, who gets mentored, who gets left off the hook, who gets training, whose ideas get traction, and who gets ignored completely. Now, the thing is, we all have those defaults. The question is, do we let them make decisions for us? If we want diverse teams to succeed, we have to do more than invite diverse people in. We have to question the instincts that make some people invisible once they actually arrive. And this kind of reflection, it's uncomfortable, but it is absolutely necessary because if we don't work to identify it, we can't fix it. Now, when we talk about prejudice in this episode today, I'm not talking about the loud, in your face, obvious kind of prejudice. I'm not talking about swastikas and torches or online trolls that are upset about Disney's newest recast. I'm talking about the kind of prejudice that hides right in plain sight, the kind that shows up in hiring panels or performance reviews, one on ones, or large team meetings. This kind of bias is often hard to name and it's easier to dismiss, but it's just as real and it's just as harmful. Now, let's talk about how it works, why it's so persistent, and then what we can do to catch it before it quietly shapes our teams in ways that we don't intend. So, let's talk about prejudice. What is it? Well, we tend to hold attitudes, assumptions, or expectations about people based on group membership, often without realizing it. Now, while prejudice is commonly linked with explicit acts of bias, it's the more subtle, unconscious forms that quietly shape our decisions, perceptions, and our interactions. Now, the word prejudice typically conjures images of open hostility or discrimination, but cognitive science has revealed a more complex and pervasive reality. At its core, prejudice refers to prejudging others, forming opinions about individuals or groups without adequate knowledge. Now, while explicit prejudice operates at a conscious level and, thankfully, it's increasingly stigmatized, implicit prejudice, it runs quietly in the background of our cognition and our subconscious and often without us even being aware of it. Now, in the late 20th century, psychologists began looking beyond what people said they believed to how they actually behaved, especially in moments when quick decisions or gut reactions came into play. In 1998, researchers Anthony Greenwald, Debbie McGee, and Jordan Schwartz introduced the implicit association test. You'll often see this as IAT, to measure subconscious biases. And participants were asked to rapidly sort words and images, and the speed of their responses revealed deep-seated mental connections, things like associating certain races or genders with specific traits or roles. This growing research showed that even people who explicitly endorsed egalitarian or progressive views often exhibited implicit biases that directly contradicted their stated beliefs. These biases are shaped by cultural exposure, media, education, and life experiences, and they can exist even in the absence of any malicious conscious intent. And they function more like cognitive shortcuts that allow us to make those rapid decisions, but at the cost of fairness and objectivity. Implicit prejudice shows up in everyday decisions, things like hiring, mentoring, evaluating performance, and even casual conversations. A resume with a foreign-sounding name might be evaluated differently. A teammate's ideas might be taken less seriously due to their age, their gender, or their background. And over time, these small inequities accumulate into systemic disadvantages. And recognizing this doesn't mean that we're bad people. It means that we're human. But it also means that we have a responsibility to interrupt these patterns once we see them. Now, in team environments, especially cross-functional teams, implicit prejudice can quietly erode collaboration, trust, and innovation. Unlike explicit bias, which is easier to spot and address, implicit prejudice lives in the gray area, right? Who gets heard in a meeting? Who gets assigned that stretch project? Or whose mistakes are forgiven versus remembered? For example, a senior engineer, they might unconsciously defer to another teammate with a similar background and communication style, even if they're less qualified. A product manager might assume that marketing lacks technical depth, or that a junior team member, they might be less likely to have strategic insights. These assumptions aren't shouted out loud, but they guide behavior. They decide who gets looped into those discussions early, whose feedback is prioritized, and whose voices fade into the background. This bias can influence performance reviews and promotion decisions. A manager may describe one employee as, quote-unquote, a natural leader, and another as, quote-unquote, not quite ready, despite similar outputs. And these are subtle differences that often correlate with identity markers, things like race, gender, or age. And even well-meaning teams can unknowingly recreate systemic barriers if they fail to recognize how these patterns operate. So what can we do about it? Well, there's a few things we can do. First, don't confuse intent with impact. You don't have to mean harm to cause harm. Implicit prejudice can influence how we treat others even when we believe we're being fair. And acknowledging this, it can help us to take responsibility for outcomes and not just intentions. Next, slow down your snap judgment. Now, sorry, tech bros, but implicit bias thrives in speed and ambiguity. When you feel yourself making a quick assessment, it might be about someone's competencies, their attitude, or their fit. Take a pause and ask, what evidence am I basing this on? Being reflective can help reduce your bias. Next, fit is not a free pass for exclusion. Hiring or promotion decisions, they often fall back on the idea of quote-unquote fit. But without clear definitions and rubrics, that word becomes a proxy for familiarity. So replace it with structured, job-relevant criteria and have your team stick to it. Track who gets heard, not just who speaks. Now, it's easy to miss patterns when everybody's contributing. So track who gets airtime in meetings, whose suggestions become actions, and who gets interrupted all the time. These metrics might reveal more than intention ever will. And lastly, bias often feels neutral. So interrogate your instincts. If a decision feels like a gut call, slow down. Ask, is this based on evidence or comfort? And often our instincts are shaped by cultural norms, not objectivity, even if we have the best intentions. Well, all right, y'all, that's it for the Cognition Catalog for today. I hope I helped to shed a little bit of light on implicit prejudice and how we can avoid some of those pitfalls at home and at work. But I'm curious, have you run into issues related to prejudice before? I'm sure you have. What side were you on? Were you at fault? Likely were. How'd you get through it? What'd you do? How'd you make amends? I'd love to hear about it. Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. To learn more about prejudice, you can find more resources at cognitioncatalog.com and click the little bell down there so you get notified when a new episode drops, so you never have to worry about falling for any of these cognitive biases again. And if you want to pick up some big, beautiful art prints of some select biases, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/shop. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the promo code YouTube to get 10% off your entire order. And if you have a favorite bias that you want to see in print, let me know. I'd be happy to take requests. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, Zoe, and many others, and help keep the show independent and ad-free. You'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those videos right now for as little as $5 a month. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all.